The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
Mike, you and I both are lovers of customized things.
Yes.
And today we join you at a lovely podcast location, and we accidentally, unknowingly, wore the same socks. There's Greater City of Sudbury socks. You have the water tower, the big nickel on there. But we did not arrange that ahead of time. I just want the audience to know. But of course, we're back for another episode of The Unlikely Innovators. And this week we were joined by Jen Taback from Design to Plume. And I thought it was just a great episode.
It really was. Jen was great. I mean, we were sitting with her just not that long ago on this big comfy couch behind this beautiful backdrop, learning about her journey and some of the important work that DDP is doing in not only in our community, but abroad as well. She talked about a lot of the work they're doing, you know, in the United States, and then bringing that Indigenous perspective to a lot of the work they're doing, but also working with Indigenous clients to provide them with, I think, the services they need to tell their stories and get their message out there.
Yeah, and you know, we can't stop geeking out whenever we have a design professional on. We really I love getting in the weeds. I love to, towards the end of the interview, for anyone who's really interested in some good perspectives on how AI is impacting the creative field, I think it was just sort of an unexpected piece, but just she has a lot of really thoughtful perspectives on how AI is impacting the field. So do check that out. And I think what we'll do is go right to Jen Taback, and here's the interview. All right, and we're back, and we're joined by Jen Taback. Jen is a First Nation partner at Design to Plume. She sees herself as a visual translator, helping to bridge gaps and make connections using emerging technology to facilitate dialogue, increase understanding, and make some cool stuff along the way. With 15 years of experience in the field, DDP's current roster of clients include Meta, Johns Hopkins University, and the World Wildlife Fund, nonetheless. Jennifer currently serves in the role of listener, advisor, and strategist on projects that venture into new and unknown territories while acknowledging the experiences and stories of the past. And now she is a guest on the Unlikely Innovators podcast. Jen, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you very much for having me today.
It's our pleasure. So we like to typically open the podcast talking about the guest's journey to where they are now. Was graphic design something that you always thought you would get into, or did you kind of take a different path to get to your destination?
I definitely took a lot of different paths to get to graphic design or where I am today. I failed out of a bunch of things. So originally I thought that I was going to be like a teacher. You know, I was going to be in the classroom, I was going to teach, and I didn't get into teacher's college. So then I went into history, and I thought, you know, this is maybe where the start of graphic design happened, was that I love museums, and I thought that I would make exhibits, like, you know, put the outfits, you know, and curate those kind of things. And that was really exciting to me. And I just didn't like history either. So I dropped out of that, and I went to work for a while, just working at odd jobs, and I got into the tech industry. Actually, I tried business too. I went to Laurentian for business for a few years, and I was like, ew, gross, business, gross. So I left that. And then I worked for a bit, and I got this vibe, and I was starting to do freelance websites on the side because I was like, I could learn how to program. It was like the start of, you know, kind of HTML and basic coding and websites. So, but I hated my job. I was just, you know, I felt like I just couldn't do the same thing day in, day out. So I was like, I think you could do like design as a profession. So I took some time off, and I was looking at programs, and I saw graphic design at Cambrian here in Sudbury. I didn't want to leave town because I'd already done university out of town and in town. And so when I saw the program and I talked with the coordinator, Ron Beltrami at the time, I was like, this is where I need to be. I think I want to do design. I want to solve problems. I love computers. I'd grown up with them all my life. So I started the program there, and it really clicked in a lot of ways. I liked being creative, but I also liked being technical as well. So things really spiraled crazily and well from there.
Yeah, and Ron is a fan of the show, and we're big fans of Ron too. I get sort of, and Mike knows this, I get kind of, I fanboy a bit when I see graphic designers. I'm like, I can't draw or contribute anything to the field, but I'm just, I'm always so excited when we get to talk to creative people like you. So one of the things I do ask a lot of our design focused guests are, you know, most graphic designers, or some graphic designers, the good ones, you know, have sort of a recognizable aesthetic in some of their work that you could sort of trace through some of the work that they work on. Do you have something you're known for in the work that you do and that you have done through your portfolio so far?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And there's always like this balance between what is art, what is design. And I've always see us more as like, as tradespeople. Yeah. You know, that we're applying, like people pay us to do a job. And I think style definitely comes into it. And, I think as you get a little bit more clout, you get a little bit more confidence and do the work, you do get a style. And I think Design de Plume and our agency and the work that we do is really known for being contrarian to, like, I don't want to say popular trends, but we use them very carefully. We have a more maximalist approach, which is based in our Indigenous style, which is at odds at a long time with the Western, kind of minimalist, very like Nike look, very simple logos. We've never had that. And it took us a long time to understand why our work looks different. And sometimes we'll see things and say, I'll be like, oh, that looks like our work. And very often, it might be something a project I might not have been active on, but I can recognize it and get a sense of where those visuals came from. So that's really marked our style, especially so in the last couple of years where we're like, no, there's definitely a reason why it looks different, and that's okay. There's, factors that play into that from our Indigenous background and the clients we work with.
Well, we are a visual podcast as well, so people they'll see this on YouTube, and I can't help. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the artwork that we're kind of sitting in front of right now.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the artwork behind us and the artist?
Yeah. So when we opened our office, we had these beautiful walls, and we were working with an artist, Mick Michelle. And she is a muralist. So again, in Sudbury, we've got this passion for that. So we were doing some illustrations based on work, and I was like, please come to Sudbury. Like we wanted something in our office that, we could enjoy up here. So I've she worked great. We just gave her literally a blank canvas, and we're like, and I love it. It's so nice to come in here and see that work up here. So, and nice to support Indigenous artists doing the work, and her work is amazing out there. She's painted so much, and it's pretty cool stuff to see out there.
For sure, you can feel the creativity rubbing off as we sit in this sort of cozy corner on this couch.
Definitely one of our coolest podcast backdrops awesome. For sure. I would say.
Yeah, it'll soak in.
Yeah, no, definitely.
One of the threads we wanted to pick up on as well is that you kind of mentioned in your path, like you went down a number of different areas.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Steve and I have noticed, through our working with graphic designers, but also we've had a few on the podcast over the past few years, that it seems to be a very entrepreneurial trade. Especially with the graduates that have come out of Cambrian, they've often went on and started their own firms, or they've done some really innovative and unique work out in various fields, applying what they learned at the college. Would you agree with my line of thinking that graphic design is inherently entrepreneurial, and how does that square with your own experience?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think exploring a lot of options and even business. I knew I didn't want to get into business and like a manager, MBA kind of track. So I think that's what kind of turned me off. But, I started in design as a freelancer, making websites. I was like, well, I can make a bit of cash, but I can also help people. And I think part of it is just economics. Graphic design, I think, was one of the first really, really big industries that was hit by that freelancer, that gig economy.
Right.
Corporations were having less and less in-house designers and realizing that it's a lot cheaper and easier to have people not directly on the payroll, right? So no benefits, that kind of thing. So I think especially our class, a lot of people from the 2009 class especially, have made a really big impact here in Sudbury with, numerous ideas, plus abroad. And I think it was the economics of it. Not only did we have a really, really interesting cohort of graduates who were coming different technologies. We lost a lot of technologies the year we graduated, which was very hard because we had just learned them. So, we were pushed out into a world where, we weren't given the same opportunities. There was no, even if you were, a straight A student with a high passion, really good portfolio, people were like, great, see you in a year or two. So at the time, I think a lot of us were just like, well, I just got to start something right now. So that's exactly what I did. 2 months before we graduated, I'm like, the internships I have are not available. I don't really want to move to Toronto right now, which I thought was, going to be kind of the plan to go work for a big studio, but it just wasn't very exciting. So I said, well, there's nothing we can lose. I did not have a lot of resources coming from a poorer background. I'm like, I have a very expensive computer. Let's just do this, right? Yeah. Like, let's make some money. So I think we were adequately equipped for the challenges and really thrived, you know, at that kind of stage where things were. And it's not, we're in a similar time right now with like the economics and clients maybe not hiring as much as they could. But I think, you know, designers are very uniquely poised to be able to take advantage of these kind of situations as well. So
for sure. And I think I always have like a invisible circle around that 2009 class too, because
I know it's
just a powerhouse, right?
It's a different story.
And I think you're quite right. At the right time, there was a gap, you know, as far as the number of agencies that existed. And I think like, and I don't want to overstate this, but I think you can actually see a tangible increase in the level of the aesthetic output of all of the firms that those firms worked with. I don't think, you know, any of the companies we had here were really taking graphic design that seriously, especially in mining. You know, some of the folks that ended up working with mining firms, I think, really leveled up the quality.
And it's been an interesting thing too, because we worked, I think because we were young, we were women, we didn't find our immediate clientele here in Sudbury, so we did work abroad.
Yeah.
And now, especially us, let's say a decade or more later, we're coming back, clients here. We had a client not too long ago be like, oh, I didn't even know you were here for an Indigenous project. I'm like, that's okay, because you're in mining. It's not typically our audience, but the connections there, it's a chance now to say, look at this wealth of experience we have. We can bring that to Sudbury. And I think even just going down the streets downtown, lots of the small businesses and organizations, I can tell when it's local work. Like it looks good when you're going around Sudbury now. And even older logos we've done are still up like 5-6 years later, 10 years later. And you know, it's nice to see that huge impact that we've had locally and continue to do as all our companies get a little bit bigger and more established, and be able to take those, like you said, that confidence, that experience here to Sudbury, which is, you know, very blue collar mining town, but the landscape's changed so much in the last 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pick up on one thing you said there about, you know, working with Indigenous communities, Indigenous groups, because I think that's something that you've made very overt about the approach at Design to Plume, and it's something that you guys wear as a badge of honor, and something that you are very deliberate in. And I wanted to know if you could talk about sort of some of the tangible ways Design to Plume either seeks out that work or looks to make sure that's at the forefront of the vision here.
Yeah, and it was about, I would say it was like at least 7 years into Design to Plume, where, you know, I was thinking, okay, why are we not looking like other firms? We were really trying to work with everybody we could, you know, and I think it's a very rookie thing to do. And I said to my partners, I was just like, I think, you know, I'm Indigenous. We've worked with a lot of First Nation clients. They have specific challenges that we're very good at addressing. And they seem like we'll go into a community and they'll say, someone came in here, a web designer came in here, a design agency, said they were going to do all this stuff. They kind of half did it. We have so many questions, and now they're not there anymore. And especially in a lot of communities, there's a high turnover rate too. So their internal capacity needs support, external support. So I told my partners, I said, we should focus on this. We should just start with First Nations, communities around here, organizations that serve them, understanding that they need really good documentation. They need to have, you know, we can't just launch the website and run away. Yeah. You know, they're going to have questions 6 months later if their, you know, intern leaves or those kind of things. So that was my first realization, that there was a specific need, and it hadn't received the attention from design, comms, the creative industry. And there was a lot of work to do, you know, truth and reconciliation. We weren't talking as much about that 10 years ago, but I had a sense that, you know, there's challenges coming. And then I think it was really interesting because as we worked with them, I realized too, you know, we have like certain teachings, 7 grandfather teachings, and one of them is humility. And I think a lot of design agencies, they don't have that. They come in, they want to say, here's my style, this is what you're going to get. And they're not really good listeners. You know, we talk about design as problem solving. You know, and that's really the core to me. I love seeing a problem and trying to solve it. But just weren't doing a very good job of that for, you know, our First Nations and Indigenous communities. So I was like, that's why I say in my bio that I'm a listener. I love to sit down. I love to, if I can, have like transcribed notes so I can literally just listen and have that processed mentally rather than just physically. And I think that's been an important change, to try to listen, try to understand, and empathize. Because lots of our clients don't have the same resources. You know, I was talking with another client who's working in the Indigenous staffing sphere, and they're like, sometimes people don't have a driver's license. They can't get to it. You know, all these crazy, you know, they're not crazy challenges, but they're the reality of it. So how do we make systems that are, you know, expect you to have a certain learning level, expect you to have a certain affluence in technology, right? A certain computer or internet connection. So these were big things that really framed our work. And they're not just challenges here in Canada. There's lots of communities all across the world where, you know, we're continuing our learning and striving to bring technology, internet access, along with accessibility, learning materials in a design system that works and is cool. And we can make cool stuff in those systems that people can access. So that's been our approach, and it feels good. You know, I've always wanted to do it, and now we have the confidence to say this is helping to solve that problem in a small way.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're so right about, you know, the early entrepreneur takes any client, right? and honestly, that's not anything to be ashamed of. That's just what you have to do. But I really like how your vision is sort of honed on something that is so meaningful and still can be fun, right? I mean, I think that's the main thing, right? Yeah,
I love what I do. I've always woken up and said, okay, what are we doing today? It can be something new, changing technologies and new stuff. Like, you know, COVID changed us in a lot of ways, but it was things that we were already prepared for, like remote work, and we wanted people in communities. And I think in terms of like, you know, was I always meant for graphic design? I think in some sense it's great because literally I don't know what's coming next, you know? And I'm okay with that. I think that kind of lifelong learning and being challenge driven is great in this field.
I really liked when you talked about being a listener, and I think it seems obvious now having thought about it, but like at the end of the day, like to be a graphic designer and to serve your clients, you need to be able to listen, right? Because I think to your point earlier that if you're just kind of going in there with this is my approach as a designer and the client is looking for a particular, you know, identity they're looking to develop, but like you're bringing whatever you think they need versus really truly listening to what they need and want and then kind of working with them that way. But I think that's probably a really good lesson for students that are in the graphic design programs right now, that if you're not going to be a listener prepared to listen, you know, I don't think you're going to meet the mark with your clients.
Yeah, and I think it's a challenge because it is like me, I want to come in and I want to say, oh, I can fix that. I just did that for a client there. Like, give me the money, I'll fix that problem for you. But it might not work for that person, right? And it is like design is custom tailored. We talk about, you know, brands are so unique and they're nuanced in a way, but in one sense they're completely imaginary, right? The work I do is completely imaginary. It lives in someone's head. A brand is only as good as what lives in someone's head and what they remember, you know, a year after. So I think understanding those people, but also it's interesting because not just those people, but what are they as an organization, as a company? And it is kind of, you know, as the designer, you're a bit of a visionary work, which can easily go to your head to say, okay, well, you should look like this. But like I put in there as a translator too, right? You're absorbing this information and hopefully putting it out in a way that it makes more sense to people and they want to take up, you know, actions for that cause, work for them, or spread that message in some capacity.
This is like I'm having these moments where I'm thinking now of imaginary work. Like I think of like the writing that I do, like until it's like published, it's all imaginary, right? Like I've written it down and it lives in my computer, but like nobody's read it. It's not on the internet. It's not in a book. So
it's like fake business, right? Until someone signs a contract, everything's imaginary.
You know, exactly. And it's like a lot of the work that we do is, you know, okay, what is the problem? Is that the real, and discovering the problem can be a challenge too, right? So all these kind of nuances that can make it complex, but you still have to act on it and create something at the end of the day where a lot of people can say, I get it. I want to do something. I want to buy something. I want to work with you. So
Steve and I are going to be borrowing a lot of these concepts in future podcasts and when we go back to the office, for sure.
There's a lot to digest. I have a lot of thoughts on it.
We love it. It's great.
Very good.
You know, one of the things you said earlier, just to kind of backtrack, you mentioned truth and reconciliation. And one of the things we wanted to ask you about was, you know, in your experience, what is the role that graphic design and visual storytelling can play as part of the truth and reconciliation process here in Canada?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I want to preface it in saying that there's not enough Indigenous people doing the creative work in this field. You know, we work in Canada and the US, and there's such few firms, and let's say there's some freelancers, junior people, but they're still not giving the challenges. So, and I think it is them that they have to do the work. Indigenous people, in some sense, they need to be in those positions to make the decision of what it looks like. which is often, it's just a huge challenge because they're insanely complex projects, politically, emotionally, historically, and having trust with both communities and governments it's an impossible challenge at times, but there's people doing the work. And I think so we don't have enough people in there. So to me, it's also about designers being more empathetic, doing that learning themselves, not always relying on finding an Indigenous person to tell them what they need to do, but taking on that work themselves and that emotional workload at times too, to say, okay, what historically has happened in this specific community too. I think people don't realize that it's not, it's not pan-Indigenous. It wasn't the same experience across Canada or even in the US, which is a lot of the learnings I'm doing and where they are like currently in those kind of processes. So I think that, design in truth and reconciliation, it still has a ton of work. We've started, but a lot more people have to get involved, and they're settlers, they're non-Indigenous people, they're newcomers to Canada too, absolutely. Who have never been exposed to this. And we had a really good conversation with someone from India, and he was like, we don't have D&I and, diversity and inclusion in India. And I'm like, I understand what that means. But in Canada, if you want to do that work and do that communications work, you have to understand that history, empathize, and understand, okay, how can I move that forward as well? Because we're the voice, designers, web designers, photographers, writers, they are the voice of that movement, not just publicly to the general public, but back to those communities as well. So tons of work still left to do.
Yeah, well, we'll take that as a call to action, I think, for sure. You mentioned technology a number of times, and I was so glad, like Mike and I work in technology for our day jobs a lot of the time. And I just can't help but think back to when sort of web and social media changed the landscape for graphic design. And I just wanted you to maybe ruminate on that for a second, but also where do you think the next sort of disruption's coming? Because we're going from antiquated long videos like this podcast to very short clips like on TikTok and things like that. What do you think the next disruption is? And maybe, I think you've sort of been part of both of those worlds so far in your career.
Well, yeah, and I think like the first disruption I felt was pretty much the day after we finished our first website for DDP. Apple killed Flash, and I was like, our whole website is this cool interactive Flash website, and I was like, you son of a guns, like, no, thank you. So we had to relearn that technology, and I think having that lesson right away really set me to learn that the tools I have today are not the tools that I'm going to have next week. They're just tools. It needs to be strategic. It needs to be the ideas, and it needs to be the people involved. And I think, mobile platforms, social media, it's really seen the shortened attention span, right? It has to be quick. It has to be catchy. And there's still a lot of people doing a lot of reading, but you have to be so succinct and compete with a lot. And for us, I think the main disruptive technology is the same in a lot of fields, AI. Right. As designers, we've had to compete a lot with very cheap human labor, Fiverr, those kind of things. And I've never seen it, like, I don't see AI as a threat, but you're right, it's a disruption. It's a new tool that really significantly changes how we approach the work. And our team is definitely, when it came out, we were like, wow, cool, this is cool. And then you're like, okay, am I not a designer anymore? Is everyone just going to make super cool business cards? You have these kind of like, I would say a brief crisis. And I'm like, no, we're going to do exactly the same thing we did, because AI is only as good as the information it has. And it's not a lot of great information, especially again in the Indigenous sphere. My business partner, Megan Van Harten, she did asked it to make an Indigenous medicine wheel, an Anishinaabe medicine wheel, and it literally made a wheel of like food in one thing, garbage. It was literally garbage. Like, like another one. It was these really great examples that I think you can find online, and we're like, if humans can't understand the nuances and the history and the politics of it, AI is not. But it is a really great tool for us to start chipping away at those obvious ideas, those really foundational ideas that I just want to say, okay, I need to scribble 10 ideas just to know what the garbage is. AI helps generate that for us to say, okay, give me, some taglines for this. Okay, those are the very obvious ones. Now, how do I build step 2?
How do you elevate that?
Yeah. Or do an outline for us. Like, it's been a very effective tool at like getting rid of the work, the grunt work. And I think I saw something really cool that was, it's kind of a meme on Facebook that was, why would I spend time reading or looking at something you didn't spend time creating?
Yeah.
And I've been given a few pieces from AI generated technology, whether it's resumes, cover letters, logos, and I can tell.
Yeah.
It's just missing. It's just off the mark.
The soul.
Yes, the energy, the
Yeah.
understanding. That a really good thing. You're like, wow, I get it. AI, I'm like, I get what you were trying to say, but why did you do it this way? So I think viewing it as a tool makes it a lot more exciting, like something that we're going to have to start integrating to keep up. But it's got some cool stuff and saves us a lot of time in some sense. So
yeah, it really unleashes that creativity then, right? You could spend more time doing the work that differentiates the product rather than the grunt work, as you said, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, I think we even see that in our line of work when it comes to, we're starting to see the impact of AI and, grant applications. And there's definitely some, I think, elements within the grants where like that could be utilized on the, the typical boilerplate stuff that you always have to include. But
and
then
idea generation.
it
and
allows
stuff,
us to kind of focus on the areas that'll help us differentiate our grant when we put it out there. So that's what you want to kind of target. But yeah. Definitely.
It gives a good structure that you would expect, which is easy because if you're not familiar with, a grant application, how you should. But then when you get it, you can say, okay, now how do I tell my story on this, template? And how do I make it, have a soul?
Yeah. I think we could have had a whole podcast about AI. I didn't know you had so many awesome perspectives on it in the design field. That's
prototyping
so
work, right? It's, I mean, yes, a lot of it's stolen, so I don't necessarily want to show have it public. But I'm okay showing a client a collage of ideas or something that, a car that doesn't exist. I can kind of like say, make me this, this car with giant, and one of our staff members, Casa, when they interviewed with us, it was really cool to see their portfolio because a lot of it was developed with prototypes through AI. And I was like, wow, that is really interesting and could save work of us trying to find some stock photos. And again, there's ethics involved around that. And it would never be public work, but when you're just bouncing ideas off clients or even internally, even better, seeing those visuals very, very quickly can help move a project along and come to new ideas too. You're like, okay, that's not working. Let's stay away from that. So our staff has really been fundamental in showing us uses that they've had in their everyday work as well.
That's great. And, I'd be remiss because this is obviously a Cambrian College podcast. We've talked about your time, at Cambrian as a student. We'll definitely, have you or claim you as a proud alumnus of the college. Hopefully you'll have us. And but you're also on our board of governors.
Yes.
So one of the things we wanted to ask you was, going from your journey as a student, to now in the business world, now on the board of governors, like, can you maybe reflect on the journey and now what it means to you to be able to be in the position at Cambrian and be, in a position to give back and to give your time, to the institution?
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I think I went to Cambrian as an older student. I had worked, and had some experience. And then after I graduated, I did teach a class or two on web design. So I got to see it from a teacher's perspective. And then being asked to join the board, I think I'm in my third year, something like that.
COVID didn't count.
Yeah. It's been really exciting because I think to see it from, that perspective, from a really from a strategic level as a business owner, right?
Yeah.
Like, college is very applicable to literally finding a job in a specific field. A little bit, it's different than university. And I found such huge success there that I'm excited because, when I sit around the board and the staff, they are so excited about understanding the place where when you're a student and you're coming, you literally don't know anything. Like even when I went back as a mature student, I knew a lot, but I was still had huge gaps. And I think seeing that from from all the admin and the staff, it makes me so excited every day. And I know Jeff, the chair right now, he talks about me using the word excited, but I love doing the work. And I think it's really interesting to say, have you considered this? Is that group, represented adequately in the plans that's coming for Cambrian? It's interesting too, because usually we're very focused in now, and my position on the board is to try to think about what's coming. What are the challenges? How can I, as an entrepreneur, as someone who's done, school from an Indigenous perspective, having to work when I was at Cambrian versus just being supported, a lot of those students have the same experience right now. So I think it's really, really nice to give that time back. I do it in a heartbeat. I'm excited to go and listen to those conversations and see how I can add, you know, and I think it's an understanding that I do have those insights, you know, when they're not always adequately represented.
Yeah.
At first when I was asked, I was a bit like why do you know, I'm just doing this little design firm, you know, it doesn't seem that significant, but now I get it. There's not enough of those voices, and we need to get more in those leadership roles, you know, in positions to give back. It's also a bit privileged to be able to have time to do it, you know, to do a podcast in the middle of the day, you know.
Yeah, don't tell anyone that.
It's just hard work, you know.
Or on a couch.
Yeah. So, and I think understanding that you know, I'm probably one of the few people in that area that has capacity and the time and the privilege to be able to say, okay, I need a couple hours today to go or to travel, right, and inform bigger policy that's being made. I think that's interesting, and I still have a lot of learning. But Cambrian has been a great place for that, because honestly, for the last 2 years, I felt still like I've learned more than I've been giving back. But hopefully contributing in a good way.
Lucky to have you for sure.
So.
Yeah, I mean, if any of the perspectives you shared with us today are making its way to the board, I think the future of the college is in good hands. So thank you for doing that. We've taken enough of your time, but you've been, we always have to say this, you've been rather generous with your time. We really sincerely appreciate that. The thing we kind of leave our guests with is, you know, and it's always like kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing at the end, because our guests don't have any spare time. But what does Jen Taback do in her spare time?
A spare time, yes, you're right. It's like
what is that?
I am a mom, so I know a lot of people preference it by being a parent. And my kid just started school, so I was like, great, they've started school, it's gonna be easy. I was like, oh my gosh, there's like so much stuff that school wants, and like so that did not help my life at all. But I'm actively working. So my mom is retiring. She's also a Cambrian graduate, but she's retiring next year, and we've been working on a little bit of a side business. So I've also seen it's called No Unanimous. We do beading, crafting, that kind of stuff. But as we've been out there, even with Design a Plume, I've been noticing another issue that, you know, a lot of, like, let's say tourism stores or governments, they're giving away like these crappy little gifts to people. And I'm like, why is there no, like, again, a mid-size Indigenous producer of artisan quality goods, you know, that, you know, might not be a luxury good, but something that people could buy as gifts and or showcase, you know, at a little bit of a bigger level. So I'm working a little bit on that as I have time. But even we've been traveling a lot with DDP, and I've been seeing the need in the States, you know, where people buy stuff from China. And I'm like, why? There's a lot of people who do really cool stuff here, you know, as Indigenous artists. So how can we make, like, you know, we talk about supply and pipelines, that kind of thing. How can we kind of make something that's a little bit more consistent and, you know, support Indigenous communities and artisans, because their work is abroad. It's just not made here in Canada, which is super disappointing. So
that really resonates with me. And this is a quick story, but I was in Niagara Falls last week, and that is the perfect example. Those gift shops that are selling Canadiana to people that aren't from here. And it's just like totally inconsistent, totally ripped off, and all from China or from other like cheaper places to manufacture. And it's not capturing at all what it means to be, you know, Canadian, what it means to have an Indigenous population. Like it's not at all, you know, in keeping with that. So I think you're on the right track. If you could just sell to Clifton Street.
Exactly. So there's all these places. Like a mid-range project. Like I know we sell a lot of luxury goods that are very expensive. I don't expect everyone to shell out like, you know, $200, $300, but there's a good there's a good midline there. So good. I'll have to follow up with that.
And I mean, and then that stuff there too, some of the stores, you know, it's pretty expensive for it. I mean,
it is,
you know, not just the tchotchkes you get on Clifton Street, but like even if you go to the airport at some of those expensive stores, you know, selling maple syrup is the only thing we do in Canada.
I know. There's so much cool stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, I went on a bit of a rant, but
I get it. That's where I'm like, good. It's resonating everywhere. So I know I have more work to do in that free time I have.
That's really good. Jen, so good to have you on. We thank you so much for sharing today on the podcast. And it was just really good to catch up with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Jen. So I think you and I had the same thought this morning. So I do take some care to, you know, think about what I'm going to put on before I hop out the door, unless it's a Saturday or Sunday, and then I look like God knows what. But when I pick the socks, there's usually a reason. If I have if there's a funding announcement at Cambrian, I have a pair of Cambrian socks I'll throw on. You know, if it's a Leaf game day, I'll throw on some Maple Leaf socks. But today, we're doing our podcast that definitely focuses on a lot of Sudbury innovators and entrepreneurs. I thought no better time to wear these socks. And you obviously thought the same thing. Was that your thought process, or was this the only clean pair you had?
Mine were on the top of my dresser. That's where I got it from. Yeah, and I just want to say that these are also socks that we were gifted at the same time from the Ministry of Northern Development.
It makes more sense why we both would have worn them at the same day. Not just like be very coincidental if pulled them out of the respective drawers.
And if we started wearing the same underwear, then everyone would have to be worried. But so far, it's just the socks. But
well, the only time that when we went to Snow Lab.
That's right. Snow Lab. Everyone wears the same underwear. It's washed.
Many times.
It's washed, and we don't wear it at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's the important part. That'll live in my mind forever, that trip we made to Snow Lab. But I had a great time here today, and I'm so thankful they let us use the space for the rest of the intro and outro.
Yeah, no, it is a really great space. And again, I just can't help but think there were so many things that Jen said that I know that I'm going to incorporate into, I think, the way that we approach our work, but also just, daily life. Again, I just
100%.
There's so many things you just want to stop and be like, can I write this down? But luckily it's all recorded and we can go back and watch it. The last thing I'll say is just to kind of pick up on where you guys are going with with souvenirs and gifts. I think I've told this before, so I'm not going to go into detail, but like Montreal, there's that strip in old Montreal where there's just like gift shops with all sorts of stuff, and the quest to find an Aladdin lamp at these gift shops. I've told it before, so I won't get into detail again, but that was one of the items that they're selling, and admittedly at a store that's designed to appeal to a lot of tourists. I don't know where that fits into the Canadiana landscape, but he was on a quest to find a lamp to bring back
a decidedly non-Canadian object.
Non-Canadian lamp that was definitely right out of Aladdin. And we never ended up buying it. We had to go through several stores, and he ended up just not getting it. One thing I'll leave the audience with that is in the same vein, Mike has started telling this joke whenever we're at airports. Now, I don't know if you guys have been to any gift shops at the airport, but they're selling slabs of salmon, smoked salmon at the airport. I just can't. Where was the thought behind that? Like, I'm going to go home to my family with a nice slab. Well, it's vacuum sealed. I'm sure it's great. It honestly is probably great. We should probably be eating it. Well, we should have gotten it when we were out west. I'll say that until I'm blue in the face. But we haven't gotten it yet. You're thinking about like on your like carry-on items, but somebody's buying it. Otherwise, sir, is that a full fillet of Atlantic salmon? Yes. Why, yes, it is. Yeah. But last thing I'll say on this, just because we're on that same note, is when you go out east, you can buy live lobsters, and they put them in a container that you can then bring on the plane. No, you bring it with you. Oh yeah, because you don't want them in the cargo hold. You can't have them in the cargo hold. Yeah. So when you're in like an airport in Halifax or New Brunswick, I know that I've referenced a city and then a province, but you see people in the airport with these like basically these little lobster carriers, but well, I think if we go on any longer, we'll be swimming with the fishes. So thanks for everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel, presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.